So, you may or may not be aware of this, but I'm sure that you have experienced it. Here in America, we are in the midst of a mental health crisis. Maybe you've experienced it personally or in your family or coworkers or friends or neighbors. But if we zoom out and look at the big picture, the numbers are startling. And I just want to share with you this morning three statistics that just give us a window, a snapshot into the mental health crisis that we are experiencing currently. So this is according to a recent Gallup poll from last year. 29% of adults have been diagnosed, this is medically diagnosed by a professional, have been diagnosed with depression at some point in their life. So that's 1 out of 3. And about 18%, 1 out of 5, are currently experiencing depression. Now, what's so startling about these numbers is how they have increased. So that 29% is nearly 10 percentage points higher than the 19% in 2015. 19% of adults in 2015 who had been diagnosed with depression. And the 18% who are currently experiencing depression is twice as much as the 10%, almost twice as much as the 10% of 2015. So not only were we in a mental health crisis, but the number of those who are experiencing this crisis personally is increasing rapidly. And when we look at young people, unfortunately, the numbers get worse. So 48% of young adults, so age 18 to 29, so this is half, report symptoms. These are current symptoms on a daily basis of depression and anxiety. 1/2 of all of our young people are on a daily basis experiencing symptoms of depression and anxiety. And then, if you look at the next age bracket down, 1 in 10 youth, so this is age 12 to 17, are experiencing depression. So this is not just everyday depression, but the levels of depression that severely impair their ability to function in life. Meaning that these 12 to 17-year-olds have an extremely difficult time at school or in their social circles, or if they have an after-school job, or in the way that they relate to their family. All of these things are severely impacted by their depression. And if you just think about this, think about the American dream, the promises and freedoms that this country was founded on. You know, that charter document, the Declaration of Independence, right? Founding fathers wrote that we are endowed with our Creator by certain inalienable rights, that we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, isn't there in that declaration this sort of implicit promise that if we have the freedom to pursue happiness, that we'll somehow find it, that we'll experience the happiness that we are going after? But unfortunately, we are less happy, more anxious, more depressed than ever before. And in fact, there's this well-known phenomenon in psychological research known as the happiness paradox. I'm going to just share with you a little bit from one study. This is from Brett Ford and Iris Moss, who in 2014 at the University of Toronto did a comprehensive review of psychological studies looking at emotional well-being, regulation, happiness, um, that was done in research. And they discovered that actually the more someone pursues happiness, get this, the more someone pursues happiness for themselves, the less happy they are. This is what is known as the happiness paradox. This is evidence-based on data. The more someone pursues happiness, the less happy they tend to be. And they found that really there's three problems with our American dream, our American conception of the pursuit of happiness. And right? And I mean, just think about what we see in the media, what we are told from a cultural perspective will lead to happiness. Well, you really have to do two things. You have to minimize pain, right? If you're going to be happy. So you have to try to remove sources of pain and discomfort in your life, and you have to maximize pleasure. And often, money is seen as one of the primary means to doing both of those things. Minimize pain and maximize pleasure. But Ford and Moss discovered that there are really three problems with this American cultural pursuit of happiness. And the first problem is the misconception that happiness is self-focused. That the way, the path to achieve happiness is to pursue it for myself. Secondly, they found that people have an inability to predict what will make themselves happy. Meaning, people will say things like, if I had this or experienced this or could do this, then I would be happy. And they get that thing, they experience that thing, they achieve that thing, and lo and behold, the happiness that they predicted doesn't materialize. And this is kind of the Solomon syndrome, isn't it? Right? You get everything that your heart could possibly desire, the power and the money and the pleasure. You climb all the way to the top of the ladder or the pyramid and realize it's empty. It's vanity. That the fulfillment, the happiness, the joy didn't come like you thought it would. So they say we have an inability to predict what will make ourselves happy. And finally, they found that being attentive to our own happiness makes us less happy. If you on a regular basis are reviewing your progress toward happiness and evaluating your own happiness, they found that that very act makes you more depressed. So the pursuit of happiness, at least on the terms that we've been told in our modern American culture, doesn't lead to happiness. Well, does the Bible have anything to say about this? You could probably guess that yes, it does. Turn with me there, Acts chapter 20. Just to set the setting here, the Apostle Paul has been laboring, serving, ministering, discipling, raising up a church and investing in the new believers in Ephesus. He has been with them for some period of time, but now he is called to go to someplace else, and he is spending his last moments with the elders and leaders and members from the church that he planted there in Ephesus. And those church members, they can see where this thing is headed. They know how the Roman Empire feels about Paul and people who are spreading this atheistic propaganda that doesn't lead people to worship the traditional Roman gods and pray to Caesar. They can see how the Jewish leaders feel about Paul and this new sect. They know what's going to happen. They know that if he leaves, he very well may not come back, that they may never see him again. Notice with me, Acts 20. We're going to look at verse 32 down through 38. So Paul's words. So now, brethren, I commend you to God and to the word of his grace, which is able to build you up and give you an inheritance among all those who are sanctified. I have coveted no one's silver or gold or apparel. Yes, you yourselves know that these hands have provided for my necessities and for those who are with me. I have shown you in every way by laboring like this that you must support the weak. Now just pause there for a moment. Just think about life from Paul's perspective. At one point in time, apparently he had a stellar reputation among the Jews. Apparently he had a family. He had a career that was on a upward trajectory, probably had wealth that came along with that. But when he chose to follow Jesus, he lost all of it. And now, for these last years, has been living a life where he has been shipwrecked and beaten and stoned and misunderstood and misconstrued, and he has been persecuted. He hasn't had a home. He's gone from place to place. He's lived his life giving and working for the sake of others, and he's done it all on his own dime. From the perspective of the American pursuit of happiness, Paul has gone in the complete opposite direction. From what we have been told, it seems like Paul has been pursuing what most would say is misery. And yet, this is the same Paul who, writing from a jail cell, could say, I've learned to be content no matter what the circumstance. Who could say, rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say, rejoice. And notice what he says here. I've given you my example, how I've worked and labored for those who are weak, how I've served. And notice what he says at the end of verse 35. And remember the words of the Lord Jesus, that he said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. And when he had said these things, he knelt down and prayed with them. Then they all wept freely and fell on Paul's neck and kissed him, and sorrowing most of all for the words he spoke, and they would see his face no more, and they accompanied him to the ship. You're one of those believers in Ephesus. You see Paul get on the ship. He leaves. And later on you hear the stories about sacrifice and imprisonment, and ultimately at the hands of Nero, he would lay down his life. And these words must have been burned in their memory because they wrote them down later on. And they must have thought over and over and over about what Paul said, and especially how he quoted Jesus. By the way, this quote, it's not Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. It's part of the larger oral tradition that was there at that time. And if it hadn't been for Paul quoting this in Acts 20, we wouldn't have known that Jesus said this. But Jesus said it's more blessed to do what? To give than to receive. Now, let's just think about this just a little bit. And how this is so counter to the culture that is deeply ingrained in us ever since Adam and Eve ate that fruit there in the garden. And by the way, another way to translate blessed there, blessed is a fine translation. This is the same word that's used there in the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are thee, that Jesus gave attitudes. But another way to translate blessed would be happy, enviable, joyful. So you could translate this as there is more happiness to be found in giving rather than receiving. Meaning, according to Jesus, the way to pursue happiness is not to pursue happiness for yourself. The way to pursue happiness is to give and serve and pursue the happiness of someone else. And in doing so, you will find happiness for yourself. You will find joy and blessing and the life that your heart really longs for. Now, one way to summarize this, and I've been thinking about this here in the last month or so. One way to summarize this would be to say that the shortest path to joy is serving others. Serving is the shortest path to joy. Not money, not power, not pleasure, not minimizing pain. Serving others. How's that for a countercultural sentiment? And you know what? Jesus knew this. Jesus lived this. He taught this. But even research today is verifying this very thing. Let me just share with you a few studies. So this is from Frontiers in Psychiatry, August 3rd, 2023. Notice, proactively participating in helping others is an important way to prevent and eliminate depression in adolescents. So this is a survey, a study done of depression, anxiety in adolescents, and they compared adolescents who took part in activities of service to those who were using medication or other means, counseling and therapy, to treat their depression and anxiety. And they found that the most effective means for in that study group, the most effective means for treating depression and anxiety was being engaged in service. And that for some, not only did serving others lower their levels of depression, for some adolescents, it eliminated their depression entirely. Just think about that. If you're a young person and you're depressed, taking them and getting them out and having them serve others, it seems a little counterintuitive, right? And by the way, this doesn't just work for adolescents. There was a study done in 1999 among retirees, and they found that retirees who were engaged in service to their community in some form or another experienced a 63% lower mortality rate, meaning they are living much longer, dying not as quick as those who are not serving others. Now, I need to mention a caveat here. This is not just any sort of service that has these sorts of benefits and effects. You can't be serving simply because someone told you to serve. You can't be serving as a means to get something else. In order to achieve and experience these benefits and blessings of service, you need to be serving from a motivation to help someone else, to make a difference and an impact. If service is just a means to get some sort of other end, it doesn't have the same impact upon our emotional and mental well-being. And also, I'll just say one other caveat. This type of service is not a masochistic service where we are serving and helping everyone else to the detriment of even caring for or about ourselves. Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. Meaning, Jesus did not command us to love our neighbor and neglect and hate and mistreat ourselves, right? But if service is done in a balanced and healthy way, out of a proper motivation, it has profound impacts upon our mental and emotional well-being. Let me just highlight one other thing here. So in our body, we have hormones that act as neurotransmitters. These are chemical messages that send out signals associated with different internal sensations. So 4 of them, serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, and cortisol. I just want to note some things. So serotonin regulates your mood. Dopamine gives you a sense of pleasure. Oxytocin creates a sense of connection with others. And cortisol, you guys know what cortisol does? This is a stress hormone, right? This hormone makes you feel anxious, depressed, and irritable. So, the journal Innovation in Aging from Oxford University, 2018, noticed that, well, when you engage in social media, do you know what happens to these? So initially, when you get on Instagram or whatever it is, initially you will experience a temporary spike in serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin, and a lowering of cortisol while you're looking, while you're scrolling. But the long-term effects of using social media is that serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin are depleted in the body and cortisol is increased. So temporarily, you're getting that hit. You're feeling that, it feels good. But over the long term, these hormones are thrown out of balance. But if you engage in service, notice what happens. Serotonin increases, so your mood is improved. Dopamine increases, so you experience pleasure. Oxytocin increases, so you feel a sense of connectedness with others. And your cortisol decreases, so you feel less anxious, less depressed, and less irritable. And they've done studies for those who are engaged in acts of service, measuring in their blood their levels of cortisol. And they found that on days that you serve, the day that you show up at the produce giveaway, your cortisol is significantly lower. And haven't you experienced this, right? Haven't we all experienced this? There is joy to be found in serving and giving to others. We can see this from a spiritual perspective. We can see this from a chemical, physiological perspective. We are wired to find joy in serving. It's how God has created us. how he has wired us. In John 15, Jesus, talking to his disciples, and if you read the context there in John 15, he has just served his disciples in chapter 13, washing their feet. He said, what I've done for you, do also to one another. As I've served you, serve one another. As I've loved you, love one another. So he's given them this example. He's telling them these things. He's talking about what life will be like after he's gone. And he said, I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be full. The question is, what kind of joy are we looking for? Whose joy are we looking for? Notice what Jesus says. He doesn't just say, follow these things and you'll have joy. He says, follow these things and you will have my joy. That the joy of Jesus will be in us and that we will experience joy in its fullness. Its fullness. I mean, sign me up for that, right? Sign me up. Now, I just want you to think about this for a little bit with me. Because sometimes when we think about Jesus, we don't always think of joy as a chief identifying characteristic, right? I mean, love, service, but he's also sacrificing, he's carrying the weight of the world upon his shoulders. But when we picture Jesus, is joy part of what we picture, how we picture him? Jesus said it's more blessed to what? Give than to receive. Is there any being in the universe who has given more than Jesus? Is there? No. So by his own statement, who in the universe experiences more blessing than any other? Jesus. Notice with me Hebrews 12. We talked about this before. Hebrews 12 says Jesus, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross. The joy set before him. The moment in Jesus' life where he gave everything, where he served to the utmost, Hebrews tells us was the moment that was achieving for him the most joy. Who for the joy set before him. Now, make no mistake, the cross wasn't a joyful experience. Gethsemane was not a happy moment for Jesus. But if you zoom out from that and you fast forward to 10 trillion years from now, what being in the universe is going to experience the most joy? Jesus. Living for eternity with those that his service and sacrifice has redeemed, that joy was what motivated him. The joy of being with and saving us for all of eternity was what motivated him to serve and give as he did. The joy set before him motivated him to endure the cross. Serving is the shortest path to joy. If Jesus could have gotten to that joy any other way, don't you think he would have taken the alternate route? Even in Gethsemane, didn't he say, if there's any other way, if it's possible? But the shortest path to that joy on the other side was service and sacrifice. Now, make no mistake. Satan will whisper in your ear that service and sacrifice is the long way around. And that, in fact, it's a dead end and won't get you there. And that the shortest path to joy is just going after the happiness, your own happiness for yourself. But it's not true. The shortest path to joy is service. A year or two ago, my daughter and I went to see some of our refugee friends, Abdo and Faiza. I've talked about them on occasion. And this was one of those days where you've got them. You just feel, that cortisol or whatever is up. All the others are down. I didn't feel like going and doing anything for anybody. A little grumpy, a little tired, want to go home and, find a container of ice cream and just, try to get some dopamine that way, right? But we decided just to go ahead and go. And we are there sitting on their couch. They're refugees from Syria. They came here about 5 or 6, maybe 7 years ago. Our church sponsored them. They lost everything. Their homes, their family. Her children are also all refugees and have ended up all over Europe. She has grandchildren that she will probably never see. And life is hard. She's handicapped, can't really leave her apartment. Don't know the language, don't know the culture. Very isolated. And as we're there, they're just so happy for us to be there. They put out this spread of food, and we're just talking with them, in our broken English and Google Translate when we need it. And, Faiza, Abdo is interpreting for me a little bit. She just kept saying, "You're my son. You're my son. My children aren't here. You're my son here." And just as we were there, I knew that our visit just meant the world to them. That it did bring joy and happiness to them. And it was interesting. As we were driving back, Faith and I were talking about this. Just reflecting on that moment, because all of a sudden my own heart feels different. And my own experience has changed from what it had been earlier in the day. And I remember just telling Faith, it's so interesting because if you were trying to maximize happiness and pleasure, I said, Faith, I could never, in that hour of time, done anything that brought myself as much pleasure as I brought Faiza and Abdo in that moment. And then as we kept talking, I also said, and I couldn't have done anything in that moment that was focused on my own happiness that would have brought myself as much happiness as I feel in this moment. Serving wasn't the thing that I wanted to do, and wasn't the thing that seemed like it would bring me what I really wanted. But it was the shortest path to joy. So let's follow the example of Jesus. And let's pursue happiness not for ourselves, but for others. And know that God will bless us and give us joy as we do that.